Last time I made a video about 3D jobs, the 3D job iceberg. I covered around 30 jobs and I got so many comments on the jobs I forgot. So, well, I had to make a new list. And if you think about it, how many 3D jobs can you name? In this video, we're covering over 90 3D jobs. And there's so many 3D jobs and categorizing them perfectly is impossible. And I did my best to sort them into 11 categories. Starting with concept and previs. So when creating a film or cinematic, studios often start with 2D storyboards. And a previs artist then creates an animatic, which is a rough 3D animation that shows how the composition, camera movement, and timing should be. And this is super nice to make sure the entire team is on the same page before filming begins. Then we have a postvis artist who works after the filming is done, adding temporary VFX and 3D elements into the actual footage. And it's kind of funny to look at since these effects are usually done really fast and they kind of feel like those early YouTube VFX videos. And postvis helps directors and VFX supervisors to see how the final effects will work with the live action shots. And then we have layout artists who set up each shot in 3D with cameras, characters, props, and they also make sure that there's no continuity problems. Alright, so that's the pre-production jobs. Let's look at one of the main fields in 3D modeling. And there's so many jobs and niches in 3D modeling, and I'll do my best to cover as many of them as possible. For example, architectural modeler, which is part of Ives. And architectural modeler, they basically model buildings, houses, constructions, and any architecture used in games, movies, or visualizations. Digital fashion designer, who often works in programs like Marvelous Designer. Then we have the game asset artist, who takes an asset from concept to game ready, because there's a lot of work that goes into preparing a 3D model for use in games. And medical modeler, which models organs, surgical tools, anatomical models, and 3D is getting more and more used in the medical field, so there's a lot of opportunities there. Related to this, we have dental designers who creates prosthetics, orthodontics, or implants in 3D, because this often has to be custom modeled and designed. And if you watched my iceberg video, you might remember this one, forensic 3D artist. And this one is interesting because here you make 3D animations that are used in court to make a digital overview over a criminal case. So a typical example of this is where a car accident have happened. A 3D artist may set up the scene where the cars were positioned, where they crashed, because having this visual overview makes it much easier to defend or prosecute a case. Then we have environment artist, who, well, is responsible for creating the environment in games and movies. And related to this, you could also become a level designer. And then of course we have hard surface modeler. And you probably heard about hard surface modeling, which is basically a 3D modeler who models anything human-made or anything with flat surfaces like robots, weapons, and so on. And you can also go even more niche than just a hard surface modeler. For example, you could become a asset or prop modeler for games or movies, a vehicle modeler, a weapons artist, which sounds like a really cool job, just modeling weapons, product modeler, which was my first job where I modeled watches, jewelry designer, furniture designer, toy designer, and honestly, I could go on forever. In almost every large industry, there are specialized 3D modelers or CAD designers working in them. So I really recommend researching some industries you have a lot of interest in, because chances are there might be a 3D job there if they make physical products. And related to this, we have industrial or CAD modelers. And CAD or computer aided design is a huge engineering heavy field and is way too big for this video. And if you want a video specifically covering CAD jobs, let me know in the comments below. Or then we have 3D print specialist, who specifically works on creating models for 3D printing. Or the opposite of hard surface modeling, soft surface modeler, but we don't really call it that. You could be a digital sculptor or create creatures as a creature modeler. Or you could even be a character artist if you like to create, well, humans and humanoids and characters in general. Or if you want to do a little bit of everything, you can become a 3D generalist, which is often also just called a 3D artist in many job postings. There's also some unique jobs that mainly work with 3D modeling and model creation, like a procedural artist who creates 3D models procedurally, which have been getting more and more popular, especially by using Houdini to create asset generators. Then you have retopology artist, and honestly, hats off to people working full-time on this. If you don't know, retopology is basically the job of turning an ugly mesh like this into a clean one. And it's hard and a very tedious process, but someone has to do it because we haven't really fully automated this yet. And as I've been talking about all these different 3D careers, you might be wondering, how do I actually break into any of these jobs? And the truth is, every role I mentioned today requires getting really good at specific skills, whether that's character modeling for games, rigging for animation, or product visualization for advertising. And that's where today's sponsor, Skillshare, comes in. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of creative classes taught by world-class professionals, illustrators, designers, animators, and entrepreneurs who are actually working in these industries. And for anyone wanting to get into character creation, I want to recommend this class, Blender 3D, Your First 3D Character by Southern Shoddy 3D, who you might already seen a few tutorials from here on YouTube. This course is a really solid starting point and easy to follow for any beginner. It covers the entire production pipeline, sketching, modeling, texturing, and rendering a character from scratch, and even helps you understand the Blender UI, which can feel daunting as a beginner. And this course is perfect if you want to add a unique project to your portfolio. And what makes Skillshare great is that you learn by doing, so you're creating actual projects, getting feedback, and building skills that translate directly to these 3D careers we've been talking about. And the first 500 people to use my link in description or scan this QR code will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare plus 20% off your first year. Thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and let's jump back into it. And then we have 3D scan technician and photogrammetry specialist. And you might think, isn't that the same thing? Nope. 3D scan technicians focuses on the equipment, the scanning process, and the data that comes out, and often does most of the work on set, while the photogrammetry specialist often use DSLR shots to generate 3D models and work with mesh reconstruction, texture baking, cleanup, and does most of the work in post, not on set. And we just talked about character artists. Well, we can go even more niche. For example, facial modeler, who, well, models faces and heads. And this is a really difficult job since modeling a face that can be textured, animated, and rigged to look and move realistically is a really complex undertaking, often needing a specialist. Related to this is a blend shape artist who creates all the expressions and the shapes used to animate a face. They often work with the motion capture team to create blend shapes that match the actor's performance. Or if you love sculpting random celebrities, you could become a digital double artist, which is a small but important role in big movie productions, who creates digital doubles of actors. Then we have rigging artists, who, well, rigs anything needed to be rigged. The bigger the production, the more complex rigs are usually required. For example, the octopus Hank from Finding Dory actually took years to finalize. You can also go into other niches in character creation like VTuber modeler and rigger, VR chat modeler and rigger, or you could get really good at simulating, well, jiggle physics and specialize in modeling and rigging more stuff. Moving on. Then we have the animation category, and the main job here is 3D animator. Yes, the making things move person. And there's a ton of jobs in the animation field, not just the typical ones like character animator and creature animator. There's also gameplay animator that specifically makes animations for games, or cinematic animator, or if you want to focus on faces, you have a facial animator. And of course, we can't forget to mention crowd artist, who's in charge of adding background CG people to make sure that movie scenes and games doesn't feel empty. But there are many other fields in animation, and a lot of them you don't even need to think about animating a character. For example, a technical animator who creates procedural or automated animation, or animation for instructional engineering videos, where you have to be very accurate and technical, and it's not always about the visual style, but more about the technical accuracy. And if you want to work with animation but on a film set, you could become a motion capture technician who handles the capture setup, the suits, the tracking, and the data recording for motion tracking. You're basically the guy who puts the motion capture suits on actors, sets up the cameras, and making sure the recording is working well. And if you don't like to animate but you love to clean up animation, you could become a mocap cleanup artist who, well, cleans up the motion capture data and prepares it for animation. This is very tedious work, but someone has to do it. Then we have medical animators or medical visualizer, and medical animators basically create 3D visuals of anatomy, medical tools, and biological processes for education and research, and sometimes also marketing, because companies that create medical equipment They have to market to different hospitals and different clinics, so somebody has to make that marketing content too. Or if you want to work in advertising, you could become a 3D motion designer. And I'm a bit biased here since this is where I have the most experience, but this is my favorite way of working with 3D. Because as a 3D motion designer, you can make so many different cool things, and since projects usually are in the advertising industry, it means shorter projects with tight deadlines, but you get to work with many types of projects and clients. Alright, let's move on to another type of animation, kinda, simulation and visual effects. So if you want to be a generalist in this field, you can become a, well, VFX artist. But there's also many niches to work in as well, for example by being a simulation artist, or even just focusing on things like particle simulation, fluid simulation, smoke and fire simulation, or even become a destruction and demolition specialist, or you can become a Houdini artist. And if you want to work with more optimized simulations and solve problems like how can we make this explosion look real but have it run smoothly on an iPhone, well, you could become a real-time VFX artist who creates effects that is optimized to run live in a game engine. Then we have the match move artist who tracks the camera movement of a shot so the CG objects matches the real shot perfectly. That was a lot on simulation and VFX. Let's move on to the making stuff look pretty category, materials and lighting. And there's a bunch of jobs in this category with a lot of overlap. And you probably heard about the first one, texture artist. And this is the dude or gal who creates textures for 3D models. Or you could become a material artist who creates the materials the textures are used in. And if you want to learn more about this process, check out my video explaining the basics of 3D materials. And if you want to work a little bit broader with texturing and materials, you can become a surfacing artist. Or if you love coding and want to get deep into the rendering and game engine tech, you can become a shader artist. Alright, so what if you wanted to become a barber, but you've always been scared of, well, people? Well, you could always become a grooming artist. And no, not grooming in that way. But a grooming artist creates hair and fur in 3D. And there's two main directions in this field, both using different workflows, grooming for game development and grooming for movies. If you just want to make stuff look pretty, you could become a look dev artist who often works with the art director and director to develop the visual look and feel of whatever production you're working on. This often means making a lot of test renders, experimenting with lighting, doing a lot of rough modeling, texturing and lighting to test the overall look, and making prototypes. Similar to this is a lighting artist who's responsible for lighting scenes and locations in movies and games. Because the more people you have working on a project and the more scenes, locations and characters you have, the more complex the job of lighting everything becomes. Because the light has to be consistent, efficient and also look good on camera. So this is where a lighting artist becomes very important. And when working with a program like Blender or Cinema 4D or even Octane Render, do you love experimenting with samples, light paths and any other render settings that make things look great and render fast? Well, there's a job for you too actually, called rendering artist. And this is a really important job because imagine making a 2-hour movie. The studio have to render so many frames, so just optimizing the renders to save 10 seconds per frame, that saves a lot of hours and money in the long run. Alright, so next category is real-time and interactive 3D. And this is an interesting field because it requires a lot of both 3D and technical skills. For example, being a technical artist, which is a very broad term relating to the more technical side of 3D production. Generally, you're the one solving problems and the one between the artistic and tech side of production. And when becoming a technical artist, people often choose a software or pipeline to get really good at. For example, by being a Unity technical artist or maybe a Unreal Engine technical artist. And if you want to work with 3D modeling but keep it as optimized as possible, you could become a real-time 3D artist, which is kind of an umbrella term for anything 3D used in real-time applications like AR, VR, games and apps. And related to this, you could also become a 3D web developer, which with a lot of new tools coming up now, you can do without coding. However, if you know JavaScript or React, that's even better because then you can work with libraries like Three.js and React Tree Fiber and make projects like this one that I developed for Omgi, a Norwegian microhouse company. And all of this runs and animates in real time and runs in any browser, and it's developed in React Tree Fiber, which is all free and open source by the way. Also, let me know if you want a tutorial on this. I would love to make a tutorial covering 3D for web and how to do it with Blender. Alright, so the next one is also real-time, but a slightly different field. Virtual production and AR, VR. And virtual productions have really become popular the last 5 years, especially after how Mandalorian used Unreal Engine to create a virtual film set by using dynamic lighting, but with real actors and filmed with real cameras. There's many jobs related to this, but the main one is simply called a virtual production artist, kind of a generalist for these kind of productions. And then we have VR and AR experience designers and 3D artists. And working with AR and VR is very different from working with film production, since everything has to be really optimized to run smoothly on VR headsets, which often requires high resolution and fast frame rates. And for AR, they're often made to run on phones, so you also have to be really good at optimizing there as well. And if you want to work with AR, you can actually do that right now by creating face filters for Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok, because all of those have their own AR software you can create filters in. And we looked at architectural modeler earlier, but there's a few more jobs in architecture worth mentioning. For example, Ives artists, where you create renders, 3D molds, and interactive walkthrough of architecture. Similarly, you can also niche more down and become a interior 3D designer, or even a virtual event designer who basically designs and plans event layouts digitally. And if you want to work with architecture but want to focus on the technical aspect of construction, you can become a BIM modeler. And a BIM modeler creates detailed 3D building models that include structure, materials, piping, and basically any technical data needed for construction planning. In this job, you do a lot of documentation and connect it with a 3D model of the full building. Alright, so we've gone through the most aspects of 3D: concepts, modeling, texturing, rigging, VFX, lighting, rendering. But there's a number of 3D jobs that has the main goal of making sure a production runs smoothly. For example, the pipeline technical director. They build tools and workflows so every department can work smoothly together. For example, by developing plugins to optimize and clean up scenes, planning how the file structure and naming should be, and anything that can speed up the pipeline. And then we have render wrangler, who, like the render artist, works with renders, but specifically managing the render farm and making sure all jobs finish properly. Another job that makes things run smoother is the optimization artist, who, well, optimizes models, rigs, animations, and everything so that they run more efficiently and are easier to work with. And in a team setting, most teams have a lead artist who guides and leads the team and solves problems when needed. And then we have the supervisor, which usually oversees an entire department and makes sure each shot and whatever they produce matches the vision of the director, while a CG producer makes sure the budgets are kept, deadlines followed, and team coordination goes smoothly. Then we have the art director, who has the responsibility for setting the overall visual look for everything and making sure the style is consistent across every department. And of course, the CG director, who's above everyone and kind of leading the whole production. They often talk with the supervisors and lead artists and the art directors, producers, everything to make sure things are going according to the whole vision. And of course, at the very, very top, we have the studio owner. And depending on the size of the studio, they might also take on a more manager type role. However, in smaller studios, they usually also work hands-on, doing a mix of 3D work, talking with clients, sales, and even accounting. Alright, now we also covered the different departments and roles in large productions, but there's a few more jobs that didn't really fit into the main categories, but it's still worth mentioning. I'm calling this category Freelance and Specializations. For example, like me, we have the 3D YouTuber job, which often overlaps with being a 3D trainer or course creator. Another job is to be a marketplace asset creator or a plugin and add-on developer. Alright, that's all the jobs for this video. I definitely missed some jobs, so please comment below anything I missed and let's make an even longer list of possible 3D jobs in the comments. But I hope this video gave you a solid overview of what's out there and pointed you in the right direction. And also, I'm still working on the next explainer video. This one will cover rigging, so keep your eyes open for that, and thanks for watching and see you next time.